You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. Charity Bedell joins me as she explains how we can turn ordinary soil into magic. In her new book, Divine Dirt, Bedell shows us how to work with urban and nature spirits, use footprints and animal tracks in our spells, and much, much more. But before that, as always, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mystriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. And you can also click the link in the show notes as usual. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media networks. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit the mysteriesandmonsters.com website, and you can find our exclusive merchandise directly through TeePublic, and the link for that is in the show notes too. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Now, let's join Charity to uncover the Divine Dirt. In the realms of magical spellcraft, one of the key aspects that often gets left behind is dirt. Thankfully, in her new book, Charity Bedell shows us that Divine Dirt looks to be re-established in its magical powers, using it in regards to spells and rituals in the modern witch's toolbox. Charity, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters.
Good to be here.
Oh, thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me. So, I'm intrigued by this, Charity, because I know in the book, in the introduction at the beginning, you mention that someone brought to your attention that you weren't selling dirt to them. And I think for anybody with a sort of passing knowledge of this, the use of dirt in spellcraft is often connected with certain offshoots or other religious practices in regards to what people may feel it's useful for. But I'm quite surprised, as you refer to in the book, how little it seems to have been used up until recently again, as though it's completely fallen out of favour.
It's just been interesting as I was been doing reading and research and learning about other paths and practices. I noticed that every witchcraft book seems to cover herbs, seems to cover crystals. Sometimes it covers a little bit about animal talismans, like if you find a claw or shed hair or whatnot, but nothing about the dirt that we actually walk on. And witchcraft is about honoring the earth and the goddess and god within the earth and nature. So why don't we have more dirt in spells? It made no sense to me once I started to think about it.
Do you think you had a bit of a unique perspective in regards to this? Because you spent your childhood out in nature, your parents instilled a real appreciation of the fauna and flora around you, Charity, when you were growing up, and some of the amazing things that you've learnt. And then as you've grown, you've discovered witchcraft and found yourself settling and feeling more centered in that kind of environment as you've matured as a person. So do you think that childhood experience of learning to love nature, whilst for a lot of people is connected with modern witchcraft and druidry and Wicca and the pagan belief systems, a lot of it tends to focus on our appreciation of the world around us and our place in it, and how our footprints can spread further than we think if we're not too careful where we tread. So for you, when you came to that sort of realization about the lack of dirt being used in modern witchcraft, you've got a head start against somebody who perhaps didn't have that childhood appreciation that you've taken with you all your life.
I was actually writing about locations like mountains and forests that made me remember some of the things that I felt in nature like whenever I love going on small mountain walks and hikes, and every time I was going on a mountain, I always felt strength. I always felt power. And I just never really, as a child, you didn't really know where that was coming from. But now I see that that was the essence of the land talking to me. And then when you get to the top of the mountain trail, there's usually, depending on if it's a public trail or if it's something, a trail in the woods that your parents just happen to find, when you get to the end, there's usually a spot where you look out and you can see a beautiful view. And that made me think, well, oh, view, sight, divination, psychic powers. Okay, so there we go. That's mountain power. Guess the old man in the mountain wanted me to share some wisdom.
I suppose as well that it's given you a real sort of basis to kind of investigate and dive into this more, because one of the other interesting parts of your book is your discussion and mentioning of conjure, which I think is something else, Charity, that often gets overlooked or gets mashed into other sort of belief systems and religious tracks that people sort of just think, oh, well, we'll just put this in this corner with other things we think are very similar to it. And yet you're one of the first authors I've read in recent years that refers to conjure and what it was and what it is and how people can use it. So is that something, because obviously over here in the United Kingdom, the conjure strand of witchcraft, it would be almost alien to most people, I suspect.
Likely, since conjure primarily developed from the African slave trade as a way for the slaves to preserve what they could of their heritage, but as an American tradition, it has slowly started to find its way into the mainstream, and there are more people openly practicing it. And I wanted to illustrate, because I was illustrating the power of these elements, and I wanted people of any magical practice to be able to use the information. So I approach it from even though I'm a witch, and my techniques are usually all come from the basis of witchcraft, I try to present the information, whether it came from conjure or from my personal experience or from witchcraft. I try to present the information in a way that anyone can use it, and they'll also know where it came from. Because there's no reason why people shouldn't be able to learn and add techniques from traditions that they haven't heard of before into their practice.
So how did you find yourself developing your skills with conjure? Because I know you refer to the teachings of Mama Star Karas in your introduction. So was that something that you distinctly set out to learn about, be trained in, gather more knowledge, Charity? Because it certainly seems to be, whilst part of this particular new relaunch and rebirth of modern witchcraft across the world, really, I think to go out and specifically learn more about conjure, and especially some of the specifics about it, primarily using the Bible in your spellcraft and things like that, some people may be really surprised that it seems to be so meshed into that kind of belief system, and yet you're able to use it in conjunction with everything else that you know, as though, as you say in the book, you use certain rituals and spells that are primarily solely using conjure, and others that you're using witchcraft, and others where there's a combination.
For me, I started looking, I was always curious about voodoo and hoodoo, and even in the late 90s and early 2000s, where that was still considered very much taboo, and witches don't go there because they have ethics that go counter to what ethics were being taught at the time. But then as people started talking on the internet, I noticed anytime I saw something that looked like folk magic that involved the saint, its roots were always in hoodoo or conjure. And I wanted to connect with some of my ancestors who are French-Canadian Catholics, so they would have prayed to the saints and they would have done work with the saints. And hoodoo was the first way I found that was able to connect their magical practices with saints and spirits from the Bible and the church. So I thought, well, let's start there, and I'll learn some stuff and see where it takes me. And it's been an interesting journey, because I've never stopped believing in the God of Christianity. I've never stopped believing in Jesus. I just have a different relationship with them, and I feel that doing some of the conjure work is showing that while I might not worship them as my primary deities, I still acknowledge they exist. I still acknowledge the work and things they did for me while I was growing up. And this is a way of keeping that avenue open, just in case, and just for them, so that way, if they want to touch me with information and spiritual stuff, they have that avenue to go through, while I'm also open to all the other spirits and deities that I've worked with over the years.
Well, yes, and you're not the first witch who has a Christian slant to their belief system and also recognises other deities, Charity. So it's not a unique perspective, but I think it's certainly one that for somebody looking on the outside in would be a bit surprised. But I think, obviously, in my experience and some of the people I've spoken to previously and some of the people I know in my social circle and that regularly visit my local crystal shop and esoteric groups, there are numerous people who have a very similar belief system. So it's not a strange thing for me to hear. And I think it's refreshing that people are honest about what they use and how they use it.
And, there was a while where it took me, it was a process I went through. I just think, do I actually still believe in this deity? And then I'm like, well, if I've experienced that deity, and I've experienced Pan, and I've experienced Poseidon, I've experienced working with Njord and Narcissus and all of those. So I'm like, if all of those deities and experiences are real, why wouldn't this one be real as well? So then I'm just like, okay, so you're real. I still believe in you. I still honor you. But I got all these other deities and spirits that I've experienced and worked with. So we'll work something out. And over time, it changed, but it's ultimately, I acknowledge Christmas, and I acknowledge it as a day that a prophet and demigod was born, and I acknowledge Easter as the sacrifice of the demigod, kind of like how Lammas or the festival we just had at the start of the month is the sacrifice of the god.
Yeah.
He dies, and then his blood goes into the earth, and that's part of the bread harvest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, well, that's kind of along the same line. So just when I'm in a church, I focus just on them. If I'm going to a service, if I'm honoring Christmas or doing things, I just focus on them, and I put everything else in the background, and then it's the reverse any other time. Because the Bible doesn't deny the existence of other gods. It just says that he doesn't want you to worship any other gods above him. He wants to be the tip top. Anything else, he says is feels is under him. So I look at this one, I'm like, okay, tell you what, if I'm in your church, if I'm in your space, you are the one I'm thinking of. You are all that's on my mind in that space. You are getting all that love, all that attention. When I'm outside that space, though, I'll still acknowledge you exist and give you a polite nod, but my work goes elsewhere. My work goes to the other gods and spirits that I work with.
Yes. Well, it's always good to be polite and clarify your position wherever you may be, Charity.
Yeah, any deities to be mad at me, so I found ways to work with multiple, and the way I see it is I've experienced too many different divine forms to not accept that many different gods exist. I might not know the names of all. I don't know the names of all of them. I don't know where they all come from, but I know that if someone has a mythology about it, then the god probably exists.
When you read your book, I think one of the things that's striking, it's one of those things, I think, Charity, that sometimes things are so obvious that often many people just either ignore it or are oblivious to it. But dirt, dust, rocks, however you wish to group its various forms together, is essentially one of those things that is wherever we are. Because throughout the book, there's a real sense of place throughout it. And obviously a lot of the rituals and spells are designed for certain locations and certain things. And I think this is one of the facets of using dirt in spellcraft and ritual, because you can essentially find dust in every home, no matter how fastidious some of us are cleaning. There will always be little pockets of dust here, there and everywhere. And yet when I read your book, it's one of those things, it's as obvious as the nose on your face. It's there, it's everywhere. Wherever we go, it's there, whether it's at work, in the bank, if we're travelling, if we're outside. If wherever we go, there will be something that can be utilised as a connection to that particular place. So, as I say, it's strikingly obvious, but it's amazing how oblivious we are to it, really.
It really was, because I noticed thinking, like, if you go for a walk in the woods, you're going to have that dirt on your shoes. So you're going to be carrying that energy with you, which is why probably when you come out of your walk and the next time you put your shoes on, you occasionally still feel the energy and the uplifting feelings you felt while you were going on your walk. That's because that energy is still on your shoes. It's still in the little cracks of your soles of your shoes. And, I mean, dirt, as you said, is everywhere. You can clean all the time, but you're still always going to have a little bit of dirt or dust somewhere. And when you think about the element of earth, one of the things that it has is the ability to absorb the energy and become the energy that it absorbs. And dirt is just a form of earth. So that's why the different places and the different areas all have different energetic fields, because they absorb the energy that's in that location. And that location energy becomes the energy in the dirt, becomes the essence of the spirit. But then there's, and that's why it's an animistic approach that seems obvious, but people seem to ignore the practical aspect, like the spiritual aspect of honoring and respecting the spirit of place. People seem to touch on and remember and be like, okay, that's an important thing. Yeah, the genus loci, you got to be friends with them and respect them. But once you're friends with them, you can call on their power and have them aid you in your magic. And that's what the book focuses on, is teaching a couple of associations with the different locations and how you can apply those magic correspondences, as well as providing ways to create your own connections and establish your own personal correspondences. Because, you might not feel the same way about a bank that I do, or you might not get the same feelings from shopping centers that I do, or you might get something in addition to what I said in my book. So that's why it's something that I wanted people to start looking at and thinking and finding a way to bring that power and that magic into their day-to-day life. Because magic doesn't have to be something that is set aside and only done in emergency situations. Working with dirt keeps you more in the present and helps you realize just how you can make magic a little part of your daily life. Just bring up a little bit of the dirt from the place you want, from the powers that you want. Like, say you want to see you're not feeling particularly attractive, or you're not feeling particularly loved or wanted. Dirt from a beauty salon, or dirt from a popular dating site, sprinkled in your shoes. As you walk through the day, that energy will really be released from the shoes up to you, and that'll help you start feeling more beautiful and release that energy, so that instead of feeling the way you did before, you start feeling beautiful and attractive and desired and loved. And that energy is then sent out and also comes back and brings love and attraction back to you.
I find the whole foot track, both human and animal aspect of this particular tranche of magic, fascinating, Charity, because I think, especially as you refer to there in regards to animism, and that's something that I've really sort of become to appreciate over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, that I feel more akin to anything in regards to the world around us in that particular form, which I think if anybody 10 years ago would have asked me anything like that, I'd have probably not gone in any direction that would I find myself in this day. And so when I'm looking at some of the work and the rituals that you've included in this whole track magic, I find, as I say, fascinating, because it seems obvious once you open yourself up to the use of dirt and the old ways in regards to utilising such an abundant source in your spellcraft. Once again, it seems blindingly obvious that if you're using your own foot trap casts to cause protection, improve your health, as you say, how you feel about yourself, to give you a look, to attract money, there are a variety of things. And so that doesn't seem, without wishing to sound like I'm making a pun, it's not too much of a large step away to then utilise the tracks of animals in other aspects of that. For me, once you open yourself up to this, it all begins to make sense. The more you read and the more you understand and the more practice you have, these things make more and more sense.
It does. And one of the things I liked about including the animal track is that I work with animal spirits a lot as a small child and through my early years. But aside from calling on them as a protective guide and to guide me in meditation, I had no idea how I could work with them and bring their energy and power into my daily life. But now that I've spent more time and I have developed magically and I understand the different techniques, I like that I was able to show people that if you can identify the animal track, when an animal leaves its paw print or its animal track, it leaves a little bit of its own essence. Just like when we leave a foot track, we leave some of our essence in the dirt. And you can harvest up that dirt and you'll be able to use the energy of that animal or that person's foot. But that's also why when you're gathering foot track dirt, you need to be sure you can identify the track 100%. Because if you don't, you might end up calling on the wrong animal spirit, and it might end up creating a mess of the magical work you're trying to do, rather than having it be clear. It might end up being a mess, and or it might even backfire and not manifest at all.
I suppose the obvious question is, can it work the opposite way and give you the opposite intention that someone would set out to, if perhaps that they've not sought the correct permission before attempting a spell or a ritual, Charity, and so it can sometimes have the negative effect? Or is that, like you say, it'll either come to fruition or nothing manifests? But is there also a danger if you don't, as you say, because one of the other aspects of this book is you've got this wonderful chapter about ethics, which I think, especially in the whole realm of witchcraft and the paranormal, I think more and more people seem to be treating things far more ethically than perhaps has gone on in the past, even into the very recent past, that we've seen some investigations and explorations in sacred lands or places where people don't have the permission to do, or they're chasing a recent tragedy purely for their own personal benefit. And yet yourself, and along with some other people that I've got to know over recent years and in the modern era, there seems to be a real ethical growth in how people behave these days, which is a good thing to see, isn't it?
It is. And one of the things I want to remind people is that it's important to be respectful to where you're going and what you're doing. Because if you don't respect the land and you don't respect the laws of the land, then you're not respecting the spirit. And if you disrespect that spirit, well, they can go mess some stuff up for you. They can simply they can decide to reverse whatever you're trying to do. Anything you sent out with their calling on them that manifests for you, they can take away. Or they can even cause these problems to get in the way. That's also why you need to make sure you have permission from the spirit and from, your friends, if you're gathering dirt from a friend's house or something like that, because it's showing respect and showing that it is important to honor the wishes and the mind and the powers that be.
Absolutely. I suppose it's very similar in regards to finding your animal spirit, because I think often, once again, people overlook some of these little nuances to this, because often when it comes to Wicca and paganism and druidry as well, people will often say that whoever deity is assigned to you will eventually make themselves known. And a little smile came over my lips when I was reading the bit about using animal track work, Charity, when you advise the reader to get some stuffed toys of various animals and see which one you connect with, which I think is a lovely way, and probably a far safer way for some people, of finding out which animal is your connection. And I suppose often these little things get overlooked, because I would presume that for somebody who doesn't know that much about this particular subject, they would probably think, oh, well, I want to follow this particular deity, and I think that this animal is my spirit animal. But clearly, it doesn't work like that, does it?
You can really wish an animal was your spirit guide and one that connects to you, but you're not always going to get what you want. Like, there are a lot of people who claim wolves are their spirit animals, but a lot of people also claim things like that because it's popular and it sounds impressive and it sounds powerful. And they want to sound powerful and feel the intimidation. And it's not that you can't work with that power and call on that power more than others. It just doesn't mean that that's the power that's going to be your guide. For myself, I've had a couple of different animal guides over the years, and they've all taught me different things. But I've also had one guide that has been by my side the entire time. And that guide actually came to me first in a dream. And then I did a couple of animal guide meditations, or actually I did the same meditation 2 or 3 times, and I got not the exact same experience, but close enough that I knew, okay, that was it. And that's one of the other things is that I think people should also learn to test their experiences and test their meditations, because what they experienced might not have been the actual truth. Because there are spirits and forces that will act as a different spirit to try to get your attention, to try to get you to work with them, but then they end up manipulating you or causing other chaos in your life, and that's just because they are a mischievous spirit. They're not evil. They're not bad. It's just they are not the spirit they were pretending to be. So by testing your experiences, it helps you verify that, okay, I am working with this spirit. This is the experience I had. And the way to test that is to just do the same meditation or exercise multiple times. And if you get the same or very, very similar experience each time, then that's the truth. And that was a true experience. But if you have one time where it's vastly different than the others, that time you might have had a spirit try to misdirect you or cause problems in your life, which I have had happen. I have called on a spirit and gone through meditation, and it was one I had done multiple times, and this time I had a vastly different experience, and like, that didn't seem right. And so I did the meditation again, and then I had the experience I normally have, and I realized, okay, I need to up my protection because some spirit just wanted to screw around with me, and I don't want that. I don't need that.
Is it surprising, and as we were saying about people trying to choose their own animal, I think one of the things, this is the thing that sometimes you find in all walks of life, that some people, Charity, will say that they're animal lovers. But then when you dig down into it, they're not actually. They only like specific types of animals, because some people will be terrified of spiders or snakes or sharks or insects or anything like that. And so when you're looking at your animal dirt section, I'm not surprised at all, because obviously if we're going to embrace the realm of the spirit animal, nobody's barred from this particular whatever. And so you may go into that wanting a wolf, but as you show in your book, you've got rituals including ants, termites and snakes, which some people may be very surprised about. But surely if you're going into this with the best of intentions, no animals off the table, are they?
No. And I mean, those were just a couple of the ones that came to my mind right away. Like, I mean, I know that I didn't include turtles. I didn't include flying birds, some of the flying birds like ducks and pelicans, or even pigeons and seagulls. There are so many animals I could have included, and not all of those animals are well liked. Like raccoons and seagulls, they're not very popular. But that doesn't mean they don't have wisdom to teach us, and it doesn't mean they don't have their own uses for us in our spirits and magical work. It's all about learning about the spirit itself and what they can do. Like raccoons, yes, there's trickery and confusion and chaos because raccoons are kind of like little bandits, and they will get into everything.
Yes.
But because of their little hands, they're easy to, they can manipulate things and bring things. So that can add towards manifestation, and they're also very ingenious. They will find a way to open doors and open bags and stuff. So there's ingenuity. So if you're trying to overcome a problem and you're not sure how, you could call on a raccoon spirit to help you figure out a way to get over the problem. Just like you could also call on a raccoon spirit to cause mischief in someone's life if they've been giving you a hard time.
Well, that's an interesting aspect. I hadn't considered the possibilities of utilising other members that you perhaps haven't got that overriding connection to in the animal realm, but also basically calling somebody in for a bit of help if needed. And that's an interesting perception, I think.
Spirits aren't really that different from plant spirits or crystal spirits in that regard, in that we can call their power and their energy into our work. It's just they're different type of spirits. Animals are spirits that we can actually touch and see and physically feel them and interact. But with herbal spirits and crystal spirits, it's more obscure because they're not living like animals. It's a different type of life energy, but it's still just as effective as the life energy found in animals that split.
Is it something that you've noticed that since that conversation at the fair opened your eyes to the possibility of using dirt in regards to your ritual practices, Charity? Is it something that you've realised that you're using more and more because of that, or do you think it's, along with some of the other key aspects that people can use in their spellcraft or their rituals, that it's something else that you've got but you don't have an over reliance to it? Or do you, like I say, either way, do you think you're using it more than you ever have, or do you think that you've got that balance right and you use it as part of your spell arsenal, as it were?
It's just one more tool in my spell arsenal. It's just, if I have some available, I'll throw it in and work with it. If I don't have any available, then I don't add it to my work. But I was just up at my parents' camp this weekend, and I forgot to gather some dirt while I was up there, because has the energy of both the lake and the mountains, as well as being a place that provides me peace and serenity and healing. So I forgot to pick up that dirt, so I'm not going to be able to use that. But if I have things with me, baggies or containers with me, and I feel like something tells me to gather the dirt, then I'll gather the dirt. Sometimes it's more the spirit of the dirt tell me that I should pick them up to work with them in something. They might not tell me right then what, but they tell me that, like, no, you're going to want us. You're going to want to work with us. So gather some of us up, bring us home, and you'll know when to use us.
I suppose as well, one of the dangers, as with anything in regards to this kind of aspect, is, do you think sometimes people can put too much faith in a certain location that, for whatever reason, maybe, as we've mentioned earlier, they're not using the right permissions, or perhaps their intentions are not the best, Charity, that they can put too much reliance on a particular location, dirt, and try and sort of basically put all their eggs into one basket in regards to anything that may be ailing them at that particular point in their life, and therefore the focus isn't on the ritual or the spell, it's more on the actual result, and therefore things get missed?
Good question. And honestly, I think, they can, because it's just like with when you work with crystal magic, you can use one crystal so much that after a while it also stops being effective. Like, there are times I can no longer wear a hematite bracelet daily, because I did for so long, and it protected me for so long that now it doesn't work as well. It has more of just a placebo effect these days.
Yes.
And likewise, there are some herbs that, because I've used them for so much, for so many different things, they're like, give me a break. No, I don't want to do this work for you right now. You've got other allies. So it's both, you put too much reliance on them, and that means you're going to burn the spirits out. And spirits have burnout just like we can have burnout. That all goes back to the being respectful and asking for their permission when gathering things, because it's a give and take. They'll help you with your magic. You give them something back. You connect with them. They might give you some knowledge or a blessing and have something happen in your life that you weren't expecting, but they made happen for you because they're like, well, this is a thank you for honoring me and becoming my friend.
Well, as with anything, I think often people will go into things, and there'll always be certain people that will not go into things with the best of intentions and the like. And I suppose it's, as with anything, you've just got to make sure that you read up on things, you check yourself, you make sure that you're taking care of exactly what you're wanting to achieve in these kind of aspects. It's not something you can kind of do half-heartedly, I suspect, Charity.
It's not. When you do the spell half-heartedly, you're going to get half-hearted results, or you're not going to get any results. That's one of the things that I taught on and mentioned deeply in my Container Magic book, which was my first book by Llewellyn, is that the more energy and effort you put into the work, the more you're going to get out of the work. That goes for magical work and spiritual work. If you just do something just to do it, it might work, but most likely nothing's going to happen. But if you take the time and put the energy and really focus on the work and really put yourself into the work, it's more likely to manifest.
I suppose with anything in regards to this, you often get people who try to run before they can walk, Charity, as you will in all aspects of life, regardless of whether we're talking about spellcraft or doing your normal jobs that many of us have to do. And so people will often sort of presume that the most potent or powerful dirt that people can use is either cemetery dirt or graveyard dirt. And I'm very glad to see in your book that you point out the difference between these things, because one of the things that really annoys me about the paranormal is that some people seem to think that cemeteries and graveyards are the same thing, and they're not. They're very different places.
They have one thing in common, that they are both resting places for the dead.
Yes, that's it.
Both portals, and can both be used as portals to the underworld. But aside from that, there are differences, and that difference in them is very important because it completely changes the energy and the power of the location.
Absolutely. And I think too many people aren't, or I think it's often people will, as with anything, Charlie, I think certain things become overly used in popular culture, and therefore people get very sort of confused or think that they're passing on the knowledge when essentially they've just read something where the source material isn't correct either. As someone that grew up living across from a graveyard, I'm very aware of the difference.
No, it's when I was doing the research to make sure that, because I was always pretty sure that the difference was one was attached and belongs to a church and the other was public. But because the words had become so interchangeable in modern society, I had to verify that. And one of the things it said is that basically this is the difference between the two. But today it doesn't really matter because they're both used interchangeably, which I sometimes use them interchangeably, but all of the places that I go to honor my ancestors and the dead, those are all cemeteries. None of them are attached to a church. None of them belong to a church.
It's surprising. I mean, I'm not too sure because, as I refer to where I grew up, obviously I've got, sadly, a couple of friends who are interred in that particular graveyard, as well as my grandmother and my great-grandparents are there as well. And what's interesting about that is both of my friends and my grandmother, it's their ashes that are in that graveyard, not their bodies. And that might be something that's unique to the United Kingdom. I'm not too sure, Charity, because obviously I know normally a graveyard is purely for the body of the deceased, whereas a cemetery can either be the body or the ashes, one or the other. And ashes can be spread, once again, in most places, as long as you get the permission. You can't just kind of wander around with an urn, waving it around over people at their favourite football ground or their favourite bar, because I don't think that would go down very well. Especially if you've got people there collecting dirt for spellcraft, they may get more than they're bargaining for. So is that something that obviously I presume that this doesn't certainly go on in your particular state as well? Because like I say, I was quite surprised. I only realised this about, I don't know, a couple of years ago that my local churchyard admits ashes to be placed in there as well as the bodies.
Graveyard to be only the full body, but more and more people are choosing to be cremated these days. So places are now starting to allow ashes and urns, and as well as the dead bodies, whereas cemeteries, it was always both. But now some graveyards are like, well, they want to be buried here, but they chose cremation. I guess we'll start letting that happen.
Yeah, I think it's one of those surprising things. I know, without wishing to spend too much time talking about the ends of people's lives, charity, and moving on to something a little bit more uplifting. I know here in the UK, in 1900, I think less than 1% of all bereavements were cremated. When they did the recent survey of this a couple of years ago here, it was nearly 80% of all deaths in the United Kingdom are now cremated, which is incredible when you think of how much that's changed in just such, 100 years is near enough a blink of the eye in time, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's one of the reasons why graveyards have started to allow cremation, is because it's so popular that if they don't do it, no one's going to be buried there. They're going to have all this land for people to be buried in, and no one will be able to be buried there because everybody will be cremated.
So essentially, they've had to adapt with the times, it would seem, yes.
Yeah. I was actually hesitant to include crossroads and graveyard and cemetery dirt in the book.
Mm.
But at the same time, I realized those are the three that are mentioned in witchcraft books.
Mm.
Those are the three that people are most likely going to flip to first because, well, they seem spooky and they seem more witchy than a mountain or a mall or a school.
Mm.
So I wanted to be sure that I included some information on those subjects, but also with the caveat that you really should not start with these locations. You need to start working with other spirits and locations first, because these locations have so many things that go wrong and so much strong connected to spirit that unless you are very confident in what you are doing, unless you know you are completely protected, you are going to get something and there's going to be some problem or chaos in your life. And you'll have brought it on yourself by working with spirit and energy that you're not prepared for.
Well, I suppose that's one of the aspects as well, because as you touch on there is this whole negative connotation about using dirt from cemeteries, graveyards, crossroads. There seems to have been, as once again, I think popular culture has a lot to do with these kind of perceptions, charity rather than people using knowledge or actually speaking to practitioners who may use it. And I think, as with anything, they've been shown in certain films and certain books and dramas and the like, where taking dirt from those particular places is always sort of associated in popular culture with people with nefarious plans in hand, or they're wishing to spread malice or place curses on people. But once again, this is something that's not correct. Obviously, as you say, you don't advise beginners to jump so far into this because of the power associated with such locations. But once again, it's not all negative, and do you think it's important to change the perceptions of these? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to graveyards and cemeteries, these are supposed to be restful places, not places of pain and suffering and danger, it would seem.
I think it's important for people to understand where the painful and nefarious uses come from, which is why I do mention them, because they are actually part of the lore and the usages of those locations. But that's not the only thing they can be used for. So it's important for people to realize they are more than just that dark and baneful and negative magic. There's protection, there's attraction, passion, there's love, there's money. There's so much other stuff that can be done with the dirt from crossroads, graveyards, and cemeteries that, yes, you need to acknowledge the darkness, but you also need to look at all the good that you can do, all the things that can come towards you. I have no problem with people using the magic, using graveyard dirt and crossroads for baneful work. I understand why and how it's used. But what I don't really go for are people using those powers without understanding where it comes from and what could go wrong for them. So it's not that I don't want people to do that stuff. It's that learn more, work with other things before you try and mess with those powers and those energies. Or if you want to work with them, try working with them with something to attract to your life or something you want to remove from your life rather than a baneful force right away. Because then if you start with something that's beneficial, you can start seeing the other sides of the spirit and then get a more complete idea of the spiritual entity. Because the spirits are best, and they are people, and they are beings just like we are, and they have feelings, they have emotions, they have likes, they have dislikes, and they have work they will not do, and they have work they will do. And you may find that if you go to them first for baneful work, that they don't want to work with you because they don't. And if that's what happens, then you got to be respectful and not do that work, but find another way to work with them. This is why I recommend using pendulums or other yes-no divination tools when trying to decide what herbs and what spirits to work with in a spell if they can't decide. Let the energy of spirit itself tell you. Place the container that holds whatever curia, whether it be the dirt, the crystal, or the herb and root. Ask it to display yes or no, and then hold it over each one until you get the yeses and nos. Set the no's aside, take the yeses, and then go and do the work. If the spirit doesn't want to do the work, then you shouldn't try to force it to do the work. So like if you wanted to make an incense and for some reason you didn't have one of the herbs you thought you had, I wouldn't stop making that incense. I would find a substitute for the herb that you're missing. Because if you're missing that herb while you're trying to make something that spirit told you to make, then there's a reason why it's not there. Spirit is a very powerful guide, and if you try to do stuff against the will, it's not going to go well. It'll either be like going against the magnetic pull, and you'll just feel like you can't get anywhere, or it'll be like trying to swim, but you're stuck in the current and you aren't making any progress.
I suppose the temptation for some people who may not be going into this with the best of intentions, Charity, is to try and combine dirt from different places. Does that have any potency? Does it increase it? Does it cause more confusion? Or is it a recipe for disaster?
That depends. There's nothing wrong with mixing dirt. Because when you make magical powders, dirt is sometimes an ingredient. And likewise, with true magical oils, traditionally had dirt as an ingredient. And it might be more than one type of dirt. Like it might be bank dirt and crossroads dirt. Because crossroads energy can send it out into all four cardinal directions. And the bank dirt is what you're trying to attract in the spell. It's chaos if you just add everything because you have it and you want to add everything together just to use it. If you have a rhyme and reason for adding certain material, then it's not a recipe for disaster. There was a process you followed and something made sense to you, so that's why you did it. But when you're just throwing it all together because well, I got this, I get this, let's put it all together and see what I can make happen, that's when you're going to get some chaos. That's when you might have some problems. Whenever you do any sort of magic, whether you're creating a formula, casting a container spell, casting a candle spell, or creating a charm, if you just throw together anything that's on hand and hope for the best, you're probably going to get messy results, if results at all. But if you take the time to look at what you have on hand, rather than just grabbing everything that looks usable, and then can look at what you have, you can then take the time to choose and formulate it and have it make more sense and be a cohesive whole, because you took the time to take the steps and focus on what each material is for and how that relates to the work, rather than just like, well, I got this, that's good for this. I got this, that's good for this. It can work, but it's not recommended, and it's not the most effective way. And I say this because I have made a couple of powders and incenses by simply taking out all the herbs I have that I work with for healing, and then just throwing them all together and seeing what worked, or how it worked. And I had some effect. It did work, at least a little bit. But then when I took the time to, again, I laid out all the herbs that I use for healing work, and then I held my hand over them and hovered, and if I felt a pull or like a magnetic force attracting me to it, then I took that herb and put that aside, and that's what I used in the working. So I'm saying this from personal experience, that doing things and just throwing everything together, while you can get results and your magic can work, it's not going to be as effective as if you took the time to actually think about why you're using each material and choosing them, and then taking the time to blend it together.
Well, as with anything, I think it's one of those situations where it's all about patience, taking time, and not trying to do more than you're capable of. Because as with anything, this is all about practice and putting that out there and working with yourself. Because like I say, often you can try and do too many things at once in many aspects of our lives, Charity, and sometimes we lose focus of what our intentions really are. And this can always be prescribed to creating rituals or spell casting as well.
One of the reasons I'm not afraid to admit when I've done something and failed, because it's important to learn. I've learned more from my failures. Like, I learned more from making healing incenses by just throwing everything together and getting different results than I did when I took the time to try them individually and make that then work together. Because I fail, and then I can then look at what I use, and then I can try a different way of doing something, and then I can see what works when I do succeed.
Well, I suppose as well, this is one of the aspects of that, because obviously the book's based on a lot of classes that you've taught as well, Charity, in regards to that. So this is the other thing, I suppose. You've had some wonderful reviews and feedback in regards to the book. A lot of praise in pagan circles and modern witchcraft in regards to you utilising, as I said earlier on, this kind of old magic, as some people would like to refer it to, despite the fact it's always been there. It's just people have stopped using it for a long time for some reason. And so do you think it's something that's caught a lot of people by surprise and they've embraced it incredibly positively? Because looking at the reviews and looking at the feedback in regards to the classes and your personal reputation as a practitioner and a teacher in the modern arena, it would seem to be quite favourable.
I think that one of the reasons one of my friends told me that they were both happy and disappointed at some of the material that was in the book, because it's material they thought was never going to be seen and published, so they thought that material was going to be lost. But at the same time, having it published and out there means it's no longer it's no longer an obscure piece of magical info. It's now out there and anyone can use it. So it's sort of, I think people are embracing it, and I think people are finding ways to expand their way, how they look at magic and how they look at their practice. Because I've had more people contact me and talk to me about this from past than I thought was going to happen. I thought originally that only a handful of, folklorists and witches who are just trying to learn anything they can would be interested. Instead, I've gotten shamans, I've gotten druids, I've gotten witches, I've gotten just people who just consider themselves natural spiritualists and non-denominational pagans. And I'm quite happy that people from all over are seeing the information and finding it useful and meaningful. That means I'm doing the right thing, and it means that that Spirit really truly did want all this information out there, and hopefully it will help start preserving some of that lore that's getting lost.
That, for me, I think, Charity, is one of the most important aspects of this book is that, and I would imagine there's more facets that have been sort of pushed to the margins often, I think, and sometimes certain practices or potions or whatever, or perceived ways of creating spells can sort of drive the narrative, whereas once again this book you kind of take a step back and kind of say, actually, come here and look at what we used to do, and this is what we should be doing. And I think it's vitally important, like you say, that we preserve such practices, not just for ourselves but for the next generations who are going to follow on and discover this incredible history and these practices for their own.
Magic that we have lost because it was never written down. And when that happens, it's almost impossible to regain it. So that's one of the reasons I liked sharing this, because I know that I'm going to preserve some of the information, because a lot of the lore I put into the book was stuff that was passed to me orally. So that means it had never really been written down. And if it's not really written down and only passed orally, only the people that hear it will ever get to use it and learn it. And this information is something that I thought anyone who practiced magic should have access to.
Agreed. And I think that's what more people should try and do going forwards. So what's next for you, Charity? Obviously, you're a very well-established member of the witchcraft community, as I mentioned. You do classes, you're a published author, you write articles. You are someone whose reputation continues to grow. So what's your next project, or are you continuing to refine your current skill set moving forwards and wanting to do more online classes and reach more people as you go forward with your career?
Doing a little bit thing. I got to look at my schedule and outline a couple of classes. There are a couple of places that have offered me an online venue, and so I want to take them up on that. I just got to plan what classes I want to teach and when. I've got another book that I've been working on that's set to come out in December of next year. I think December next year is when it was set for, but it might end up being pushed back because sometimes they have more books coming out than they can get out when they really want. And that book continues along the same theme and is, again, a mixture of really ceremonial work as well as the down and gritty folk magic. This one focuses on magical powders, which is something I touched a little bit on in Divine Dirt, but not enough. So that's what the next book project is, of different lore, as well as give lots of formulas and spells and practical uses for things that you might not think about. People can find me on Facebook. They can find me on Twitter or X. I'm trying to do more with my TikTok account. And I'm trying to do a little bit of teaching and a little bit of just trying to reach the community more. So a little bit of everything.
Good. Well, as with everything, Charity, it's been deeply insightful speaking with you, giving a bit more depth to your fantastic book. So where can everybody follow you online and also get a copy of not only this book, but your previous published works as well?
You can find my previous book, which the first one is The Good Witch's Guide, a modern-day Wikipedia of magical ingredients and spells. That one I wrote with Sean Robbins. It was released in 2017. That one's on a mixture of holistic health and magic. Then I have Container Magic, which is published by Llewellyn, and The Divine Dirt, which you can find all three on Amazon. You can order them directly through their publishers, two of which are Llewellyn. The other is, I think, Square Media or something is what they were called now. They used to be called Sterling Echoes. Mm-hmm. And you can find articles by me in the Which Way magazine. I don't have one every month, but I do have one every few months. And then you can find me on Facebook and Twitter as Charity L. Bedell or Luna Wind. And you can find me on Instagram as Luna Wind. And you can find me on TikTok as Luna Wind.
Fabulous. Well, I'll put links to everything in the show notes for everybody to follow you. And I just want to say thank you again for your time and your conversation and sharing your love of this particular subject and your knowledge with myself and the listeners. Thank you, Charity.
Jan, I'm glad I could be here.